Morning, everyone. Welcome to meeting 8 of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. I'd like to welcome before us today our Chief Electoral Officer, Mr. Perio, the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, and the other Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, Internal Services. So one is for electoral events and innovation, and one is for internal services. Thank you to all of you for being here today. We're meeting on the supplementary estimates. We'll start with 10 minutes, a 10-minute statement, and then continue on into our questioning rounds.
Alors, merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to be before the committee for the first time during the 43rd Parliament today. Today, the committee is studying Elections Canada's 2019-2020 Supplementary Estimates B. These estimates are related to the implementation of Bill C-50 and Bill C-76, which were passed in the previous Parliament. I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about the conduct of the general election and current priorities for the agency as well. It is important to point out that my office is funded by two separate authorities: an annual voted appropriation and an ongoing statutory authority. The annual appropriation covers the salaries of all indeterminate positions at Elections Canada and with the Commissioner of Canada Elections. The statutory authority covers all other expenditures, including administrative expenses such as office space and IT infrastructure, and the costs related to the preparation and conduct of an election. The statutory authority is important both to the independence of my office and its ability to conduct electoral events that may occur at any time. Planned spending under the statutory authority is included in the estimates for reasons of transparency. The supplementary estimates for 2019-2020 include an increase of $2.3 million for the implementation of Bill C-50 and Bill C-76. While most of the changes can be administered with existing resources, the agency requires additional capacity for the administration of the new political financing rules, the register of future electors, and the administrative monetary penalties regime of the Commissioner of Canada Elections. In addition, the supplementary estimates provide for a transfer of $2 million from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions to the Office of the Chief Electoral Officer for the transfer of the Commissioner of Canada Elections under C-76. On February 18th, my report on the 43rd general election was tabled in the House of Commons. This report, which is the first in a series of 3 post-election reports, provides a factual description of how the election was administered and identifies issues requiring further analysis. While not without its challenges, the administration of the election was overall a success. In particular, the quality of the data in the National Register of Electors allowed for the most complete and accurate preliminary list of electors for any federal election on record. The quality of the list impacts the overall delivery of the election. Quality list ensures first that electors are assigned to the right polling location, second, that they receive the basic information they need on their voter information card, and third, that candidates and parties have reliable data for their campaigns. Another positive aspect of the election was the conduct of the advance polls. This had been a major challenge in 2015 when voters experienced significant and systemic lineups across the country. This was the result of an ongoing trend as electors increasingly opt to vote at advance polls. Important steps were taken to deal with this in 2019, including a streamlining of procedures at advance polls, and so there was a 25% increase in the number of advanced polling divisions and a legislated 50% increase of service hours for each of the 4 advanced polling days. No major lineups were reported, despite an increase in voter participation of 1.2 million voters, or 32% at those polls. A third area worth mentioning relates to cybersecurity and disinformation, which had been top of mind in preparing for the election. We experienced no cybersecurity threats of significance beyond those faced daily by any federal government organization. Elections Canada also monitored social and traditional media for inaccurate information about the electoral process, and on some occasions contacted social media platforms or websites to bring inaccurate information or inauthentic accounts to their attention. None of these instances were concerning in terms of their scope. That said, I believe that the measures we took concerning cybersecurity and disinformation were important to protect the electoral process and reassure Canadians.
Challenges. The delivery of a federal election is a major logistical event that relies on a very large temporary workforce. For this election, returning officers aimed at recruiting some 250,000 poll workers, but were only able to recruit 214,000. They also face problem as over 10,000 of these, having been recruited and trained, did not show up for work, which is a marked increase from previous elections. In a number of locations, this resulted in polling locations not being open on time. And I'll come back to this in my next report, my retrospective report on the election. The issue of recruitment and retention is a priority for us as we prepare for the next election. But in the longer term, we will also need to look at ways to operate with a reduced workforce. A second challenge for the election was the fact that polling day and a number of advanced polling days coincided with Jewish high holy days. I made it a priority for returning officers to engage with the Jewish community in their ridings and to offer alternative options to vote either at an Elections Canada local office, at the returning office, or at special voting kiosks set up within the community at times and locations that are convenient for those members of the community. I intend to do some consultation this spring on the issue of conflicts between religious holidays and the fixed election date. This may result in recommendations to Parliament in the fall to try and avoid similar conflicts moving forward, or at the very least to make sure that they are resolved earlier in the electoral cycle. Finally, there were an unusual number of quite severe weather incidents during the election, in particular in Manitoba, where extensive and prolonged power outages forced evacuations in a number of communities. We provided alternative or adjusted voting options for electors from the affected communities, as well as for emergency workers. We are currently looking at preparing ourselves for more frequent weather-related events so that we can quickly respond to them. As we are closing the general election, we are taking time to analyze these and a number of other aspects of the election. Our findings will be included in a second post-election report, which I hope to publish in September, early in the fall. This retrospective report will provide an analysis of the administration of the election, informed by a variety of data, including stakeholder feedback and public opinion research. As part of my statutory mandate, a third and final report will be provided to the Speaker later in the fall, which will provide recommendations for improvements to the Canada Elections Act. And I note that these reports are referred automatically to this committee for review. In that context, I will be releasing next month 3 discussion papers to engage experts and stakeholders, including political parties. The papers will address various aspects of the regime governing political communications in a federal election, notably the rules that we currently have in the Canada Elections Act, the impact of social media platforms, and concerns that have been raised about the privacy rights of electors in the digital age. Discussions around those topics could lead to some of the recommendations in my report. As the general election resulted in a minority parliament, our immediate priority is to ensure that the agency is positioned to deliver an election that could occur at any time. At a minimum, this means revising contracts, replenishing supplies, and engaging with returning officers so that contingency plans are in place. In the current context, it also means engaging with government experts on the possible impacts of COVID-19, and we are doing that on an election, and developing some mitigation strategies. We will also be looking at improvements to our services and systems, but the extent of the changes will, of course, depend on the timing of the next general election. Madam Chair, I look forward to working with this committee, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the members may have.
Okay, we'll start with our 6-minute rounds. Mr. Richards.
Thank you. Start out, I guess. You noted in your comments about cybersecurity and disinformation, and you mentioned that you experienced no cybersecurity threats of significance beyond those faced daily by any federal government organization. You also had a report that you recently put out that indicated the same. And I know this was something that we heard a lot about from the previous minister in the previous government, the previous Liberal government prior to the last election. That there was a lot of this concern about whether there'd be foreign influence, like Russia and places like that would be trying to influence our elections, and this was something that they seemed to be quite concerned about. Now you've indicated that you had took some measures concerning cybersecurity that you think were important in protecting the process. Can you maybe give us some indication? I mean, you're saying you didn't experience any threats. Can you give us an indication of how those measures, in fact, like examples of how those measures actually prevented that, or do you think it was just that nobody made the efforts to try to interfere from outside of Canada in our elections?
Well, if we look at our systems, in the lead up to the last election, we were in a situation after 2015 where we had to renew a number of key elements of our IT infrastructure, in particular our data center. We needed a new data center. So we built a much more secure data centers, and we worked with the Communication Security Establishment of Canada. We ensured that we had very high levels of protection. Now, every department and every agency who has infrastructures in Canada receives on a daily basis hundreds of thousands of attacks of a generic nature. And what I can say is that this was also the case during the election, as it is every day. There was nothing specific.
So what you're saying is that you didn't see anything that was outside of what would ordinarily be experienced in a department of government on a regular day or week or month or whatever. So I guess what I'm trying to determine is, there was all these, we seem to get a lot from the Liberal government in the last few years leading up to the election, that there was going to be all these threats that were going to come from outside of Canada, all these foreign threats that would, be impacting our election in some way. And what I think I'm hearing from you is that just didn't materialize. Like yes, you put measures in place, but you're not telling me that you saw anything that was outside of the ordinary. So are what you saying is, as far as you can tell, there was no attempt by Russians or other foreign countries to try and interfere in our elections in that basis? Is that what you're saying?
As far as I can tell, that is the case. Now, my role is to protect Elections Canada's infrastructure. The government has a different mandate. It has a much broader mandate, and they do their own things. But from my point of view, there was nothing that we detected.
Sure. Okay. And I appreciate that. Now, in terms of foreign influence and interference in our elections, one of the things that, I kept trying to point out was that maybe we needed to look a little bit about how, foreign money was coming into third parties and how that was allowing foreign influence in our elections. There was certainly some talk that in 2015 that, there was organizations that even claimed that they changed the results of the election with outside money from outside of Canada. So in the 2019 election, obviously there were some new rules put in place around third parties and their funding. So can you tell us, are you able to give us any indication as to whether that prevented foreign money from coming in and influencing the election, whether it be in the pre-writ period or in what I call the pre-writ period, or even during the writ period? Tell us whether you think that foreign money still was able to be utilized by these organizations to influence our elections, or whether you think that was completely prevented.
So I can't speak to the pre-writ period, but the period for which there was reporting, we are currently reviewing the reports. There was 147 third parties that were registered. There may be some more that needed to register, and we're following up on that. Most of the reports have been filed. If you go on our website, you will see, I think it's about 115 of the reports that are currently filed, and we will be doing a review of that. What I can say is that the rules around foreign funding of third parties have been reinforced and clarified. I also said when we examined Bill C-76 in the last Parliament that the regime was reinforcing considerably, but was not an airtight regime. The regime does not trace the money back to individual contributors. And that is a choice of Parliament. There are charters or issues around going into a much more tight regime.
Sure, I've been told I've only got a very limited amount of time left. I think I've got basically what I needed in terms of that, and I mean obviously that's something that you're right. Parliament does have to consider whether that's still occurring or not. During the last election, you chose to pay some people who you called social media influencers, and that was, I guess, to try and promote the 2019 election. There was a bit of uproar about that. You pulled back on that, and it was because of that. I think there was some discovery that maybe there was, by at least one of those individuals, had been some partisan activities that had taken place. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the criteria was for choosing those influencers, and whether those were Elections Canada employees, and whether you would consider doing that kind of initiative again?
So I'll start with the last point, which is I think the bottom line.
There's no further time. There's no further time. But somebody else can definitely pick up on it, and I'm sure that there is an answer to it. Mr. Gerritsen.
Information here, but okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try not to ask you a question when you have no time to respond. I wanted to first start by saying that what you did in Elections Canada to encourage voting in educational institutions, post-secondary institutions, was hugely successful, at least in my riding. I'm from Kingston, so we have Queen's University. What we saw were record numbers, at least from our anecdotal perspective, of individuals going out and voting and having the opportunity to vote back in their home riding so easily. I have a number of students, for example, from Alberta that had the opportunity to, at Queen's University, vote back in their home riding, and it was a very, very easy way to do it rather than a complicated process. And that was very much appreciated. So I just want to applaud you on that work. I do want to ask a little bit about election preparedness. Now, you said that you're ready, given a minority government. I have to be completely honest with you. I don't know how ready we were this year. When the writ dropped, there were some stories about people showing up the next day and saying, I want to vote by special ballot. And the returning officers would say, sorry, we're not ready for that yet. Can you comment on that at all?
So I'd like to find out a bit more about that. We had the offices open on the 1st of September to be prepared because we had a fixed date election for any time when the writs would be dropped, and we knew it would be after September 1st. I know that we had in some ridings issues with the installment of the technology with the telephony, a few days of delay. I'm not aware in your writing, but I will follow up on that.
I encourage you to do maybe some exit interviews with your returning officers to find that out, because it's not just one writing or another. And I'm not even referring to my writing. I'm referring to what I've heard. Another interesting thing that I found personally is, and this was in my writing, but I do want to say that the returning officer in my writing was extremely capable and did an excellent job. I just don't know if they had the resources that they needed in time. But I've also heard this in other writings. So, for example, on the day the writ was issued, I went to file as a candidate, and I was told we're not ready for anybody to file as a candidate yet. And I know this happened in other writings too. We had to wait about 5 or 6 days. Where this poses a problem is that we can spend money in a pre-writ period through our EDAs, our electoral district associations, and that's properly recorded. We can spend money as a candidate during the writ period, and that's separate. But there's this 4 or 5 day window between there that, technically speaking, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, we shouldn't have been spending money. And it first of all, is that correct?
Let me clarify that. you are entitled to spend money prior to being registered. You will have been deemed to have been a candidate going back to when
there
you
is
started.
provision in there
so
for
there
that.
is no
Okay.
there
Okay,
is no
good.
stoppage of spending. I would also say that we have, and I'm sorry to hear that you were not able to file immediately because that's our goal. We did introduce a novelty in this election, which was not as well received. I think
Online stuff?
The online.
So and I'm short on time, but I did try the online. I was set to go, and we were ready to hit the click button, and then we were told, no, we don't have your special code that you need to enter. So then we said, fine, we'll come do it in person. We went in person, and they said, no, we're not ready for you to do this in person yet. And again, I want to stress that this is, I would not be saying this if it was just my writing. I've heard this from multiple different writings. So I guess the bigger question here is, and I have 2 minutes, and I want to give you time to answer this, is we were in a majority government, or there was a majority government, I should say. We knew 4 years in advance exactly when the election day was going to be. We're in a minority, this is a minority parliament now. We don't know. That election could be called this afternoon, for all we know. Hopefully not, for our sake and yours. But if it was, how can you reassure Parliament that you're ready to go and that all the systems are in place? And I'd like to give you the remaining minute and a half to answer that.
Well, I'll have to be honest with you. An election run and a snap election is not, the start will not be as smooth as an election that is planned 4 years in advance. And we are getting feedback from returning officers. We're trying to do the analysis of how we can improve the process. But we have to expect that in any snap election, it takes returning officers have to, first of all, sign a lease. We have to set up the office. So there will be a few days where the physical office is not set up in a snap election. That's a standard. However, one of our goals is to improve the online services so that campaigns do not have to rely on face-to-face interaction. If they want to file early, they can do that. If they want to apply online for a special ballot, they can do that. So the virtual service offering is really important in those first few days when returning offices are being set up. But the reality is, in a snap election, it does take a few days. Our goal, I think, is 48 hours for all offices to be set up.
My 30 seconds remaining. Have you done or will you do any kind of exit interviews with returning officers to discover best practices, to be able to be prepared to learn?
Every returning officer has written to us a post-election report on their experience, positive and negative. That's critical to us. We've got a summary of that, and we can share it if you're interested. We were planning until yesterday to have face-to-face meetings with all returning officers in April, but with the current COVID-19 situation, we've decided to cancel those. We'll be having teleconference calls and videos. We've had to adjust, but we have reports from every returning officer.
Okay, thank you. Madam Normandy, welcome to the committee as well.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. If I may, I'd like to begin with questions on the funding or financing of parties. There was an article that came out in April 2019, I believe, that talked about minors financing political parties, and they were saying that the situation's different in Quebec, where you have to be of the age of majority to do so, and the Bloc Québécois allowed people 16 and over, because that's allowed in the province, to buy membership cards. So I wonder if you can talk to us about the federal situation, because minors could do it in Quebec but not elsewhere. Well, listen, I don't have a strong opinion on this, and I think we could review that. For some young people, I think buying a membership card at the age of 16, for example, under 18, can be a way to participate in the democratic process. But we just have to make sure that we watch it carefully and make sure that people aren't using other people's names. When names can be similar, that could raise suspicions, and there might be investigations on that. Well, to your knowledge, have there been any cases where people who were very young were the object of or the subject of any investigations? Well, I don't have any statistics, and I don't recall any kind of investigation for people using fake names. And I think there was a contribution that was talked about in the papers at one point. It's not an unusual situation in the sense that there are people who contribute at the age of 16, but I can't say more about that. My second question, once again on public financing, we know that was done away with. We didn't, rather than going back to this per vote subsidy. And have you done any investigations or consultations to see if that might be an idea to go back to that? Well, it would depend on what the variables might be. We did publish in the past a study that went back to 2004, and I think went through to 2014, and that was on the impact of various reforms in terms of political financing, including the contributions, the quarterly payments that you referred to, and that's on the website if you want to see how that affected financing. Thank you. Once again, I'm asking all of my questions on political financing in this round. I might talk about other things later, but we can see that the vote currently is more and more fragmented. We find ourselves in a situation with a minority government, and there's a great deal of vote sharing here. So you have to have reached 10% of financing to get anything back. So can you talk to us a bit about trends and how this is developing currently? And the fact that you still have to reach that 10% minimum with our current system. Well, I think that my role here is just to give basic information, and the parliamentarians will decide what to do. And I will indeed be publishing a report. And I think we need to give much more data on political financing, amongst other things, and on the trends that we've been observing, and also to allow parliamentarians the time to study this and draw their own conclusions as to whether or not the current levels are adequate. Is it too low, too high? In terms of the level that you need to reach to get a refund. So we'll have to look at all of the data. Do I have any more time? 2 minutes? Fantastic. So in the same vein, in order to get a refund at the national level, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but a party has to have at least 5% on all of the ridings where they had a candidate run. Or is it 2%? I'm not sure if it's 2 or 5. Now, but there seems to be, as well as a fragmentation of the vote, a kind of regionalization of votes. In the prairies, for example, we saw a very strong vote for the Conservatives, and it seems more difficult for a party at that point in time to reach that level when you count all of the ridings that they're running candidates in together. So do you think that might be the subject of a review as well? And do you have any data on that particular situation? Well, I think that I could give you the data. We have the results, and we don't need to go to the financial statements to see that. But it's 2% nationally, and that's for the total of all votes cast, or 2% in the ridings where there were candidates. So in the Bloc, it's probably the 5% figure that's more relevant. But these are the thresholds that have been in place for a very long time. But we can look at the data to see if there's been some kind of evolution or development since the last elections in this regard. So,
Ms. Blaney.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I thank you all so much for being here today. You talked in your report about Manitoba, and I know that in the election in 2019, the Interlake region, within the riding of Churchill, I'm hoping to say it right, Kiwanuck-Aski in Manitoba had to be evacuated due to the severe snowstorm that hit a lot of communities, and the storm impacted largely Indigenous communities. And as the evacuations took place during early voting, hundreds of voters were not back in their home communities on election day, which meant many First Nations were not able to vote. And really, to me, that means they were disenfranchised. So I'm just wondering, how has Elections Canada moved with this? Has there been any internal investigation done on what went wrong to lead up to this and election day in that particular area?
A couple of things. If you look back at what happened in Manitoba, what was unique in this election compared to others in the past, because there has been floodings in Manitoba, there have been evacuations in the past. Typically, the evacuation was mandatory, which meant that the entire community was brought into typically Winnipeg at a single location. So what we would do in those cases was essentially to transfer the polling place to that location, and we had the entire community. We had the poll workers and the voters. What was extremely challenging in this election is that the evacuation was not mandatory. Some people left, some people stayed. That was true of voters, that was true of poll workers. Those who left did not all go to a single location. They were spread out around the Winnipeg area, but not in a single location. So we could not use the traditional approaches. So what we did, and in some cases, the power was not back on even on polling day. So it was a prolonged period. So we had a central polling, what we call a mega poll in Convocation Hall in Winnipeg for all of the displaced voters, but they had to travel there, and there was transportation organized. And we did open also the polls in the evacuated communities for the people who stayed behind. Now, where there was no power, we had to have reduced hours because it was getting dark and there were security reasons, and we needed to coordinate the process. So I think in these very difficult circumstances, we did quite well. If you look at the turnout, there was a small dip in turnout in the communities. Churchill was the most affected. There was an 11% dip, but the others are talking more about 3%, which is aligned with, in some cases, what you see in the provinces. It depends from one province to province. So I think there was tremendous work that was done on the local level. Returning officers shared their staff. They coordinated their work, and I'm extremely satisfied of the work that was done then. What we need to do looking forward is we had 3 major weather incidents during the election, and we need to plan for more of that. We had one out east when we tried to open the polls, the RO offices. We had one in Montreal on polling day, and we had Manitoba. So this is a significant challenge on the organization and on the workforce, because when these things happen, you do lose not just the voters but the workforce as well.
There was also record that Elections Canada officials from Ottawa were making decisions and not really listening to the people who were there locally. And I'm just wondering, how do you figure out that process to make sure, because I think this is really important, looking at rural and remote communities, even if they're in a more urbanized Winnipeg area, there's specific things that local people would know, and it doesn't sound like the communication. So I'm just wondering, what are you doing to look into improving that communication line?
I can assure you that I was on the phone with each returning officer and their teams of the affected communities every day, sometimes twice a day. Every day during the storm period, to understand exactly what was the situation and the extent of the impact on their operations and on their teams. And we had also the returning officers from other neighboring ridings who were not necessarily affected, but who were on the calls to help and share polling locations and share staff. And this happened on a daily basis, all the way between the beginning of the storm during the advanced polls all the way to polling day.
So you said transportation was conducted for voting, and I'm just wondering, you said earlier that it was not as organized because of the nature of this particular issue, and I don't think, I understand it wasn't mandatory, but I'm sure Elections Canada doesn't want to decide for people how to make decisions about their safety and well-being. So I'm just wondering, how did you sort of coordinate to make sure that these people actually had access to the transportation? I would like to hear more on that.
So I'll let my colleague Michelle add to my comments, but just to come back, of course, in the past when the evacuation was mandatory, it was not mandatory by Elections Canada. It was the local authorities that created a mandatory evacuation. In this case, there was a provincial state of emergency, but the evacuations were not mandatory. So we had a fluid situation with people basically going everywhere. We had also, through our connections with the Government of Canada security organizations, the RCMP and the GOC network, we had some intelligence on the situation of the power, on the situations on the ground. So we had a network of partners that helped us in understand exactly what was the situation. On the transport, Michel, if you have information, but we can come back to this with more information.
It was arranged via the Red Cross in Winnipeg, the various locations where evacuees, where we knew that there were evacuees. We made arrangements with the Red Cross to provide for transportations a number of times during election day to take them to convention or to vote.
Thank you, Ms. Blaney. Mr. Broussard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to pick up where Mr. Richards left off, Mr. Perot, and I'm going to ask a straightforward question. Would you agree with me that Elections Canada is nonpartisan in nature and an independent body of Parliament?
That is the overriding consideration, and absolutely, at all times, we need to maintain that the reality and the perception of our nonpartisan nature.
So how did we get to a point where where Elections Canada paid $650,000 to social media influencers who were proven to act in a partisan nature from previous posts that they had made on social media? Who made the decision to engage in that type of activity within Elections Canada, and why was there no vetting done of these influencers?
So there's a number of elements here. I think I need to step back a little bit to describe what was the issue we were trying to resolve. In 2015, we had what I call a 30% gap in youth registration. There was 72% of voters aged 18 to 24, first-time voters, who were not registered. And that means that 28% does not get a voter information card that gives them the basic information about where and when to vote. That is a big challenge, and I think it's critical for us to make sure that all Canadian voters have that basic information. So in the lead up to this election, there was discussion on how to address this, and we decided to have a pre-writ campaign, a segment of which was going to involve the use of those influencers. How
were these influencers vetted? That's my question. I know that there was a gap, and I know that the mandate of Elections Canada is to engage Canadians. I get that. The question is, $650,000 was spent on these social media influencers who clearly had a partisan bias in their history. Who made the decision, and why weren't they vetted?
So we did work with a private ad company who provided
the ad company.
I think it's AdCart, but I want to make sure I don't.
Okay.
Ultimately, I'm accountable for that. It is not the ad company that's accountable. It's my accountability. We did ask them to clearly and carefully vet all of the influencers, and I did ask my team to do the same. So obviously, that vetting did not perform to my satisfaction.
The ad company paid?
The ad company did not. We did not pay $200,000 to the ad company that would otherwise have been paid. They agreed not to ask that money in terms of their own fees. The only thing that was paid were out-of-pocket expenses for the production, and mostly the money given to the influencers themselves.
So, sorry, what was the name of the ad company again?
Ultimately, it's my accountability.
Right, you could provide that to the committee?
I can provide it to the committee.
Where are they based out of?
Again,
okay,
sir,
provide that to the committee,
I'll
please.
provide that,
Thank
but
you.
it is my accountability. It's not their accountability.
Would you consider doing this type of campaign again?
I want to be clear on that. This is not part of our playbook moving forward. We have no plans. In fact, I do plan not to have that moving forward.
Okay. So the second, how much time have I got left?
2 minutes.
Perfect.
Almost.
Second question I want to ask is related to a fundraising event that happened in New York City with the now Minister of Indigenous Services, Mark Miller. It happened on October 10th, 2019. My understanding is that he was in New York City for business and that there was a fundraiser for an election campaign. However, his disclosure to Elections Canada, in his disclosure, there's no mention of any contributions made from any Canadian living in New York, nor any contributions over $200. Does this seem odd to you?
His return is being audited as we speak. If there's an anomaly, like in any cases when we see something that warrants the commissioner's attention, we involve the commissioner.
So his return is being,
I
just to confirm that his return is being audited at this point, correct?
my answer is a generic one because I do not comment on specific cases. Whenever we see something that warrants review that goes beyond the nature of an audit, and then it's the role of the commissioner. I should mention that he also, of his own initiative, of course, is aware sometimes of circumstances or receives complaints, and he will decide whether an investigation is warranted. It's his decision, not mine.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, I am asking that the commissioner table the name of the ad company, where they're located, and how much exactly they were paid. Thank you. To the committee. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Alghabra.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all, Mr. Pro. Good to see you. Thank you for being here. I want to thank you and your entire team across the country. Elections Canada is the guardian of democracy, and it's very important that you continue to maintain public confidence in what you're doing, and we're all grateful for the work that you do. I want to give you the opportunity to talk about what happened in the last election. There was an issue of election day falling on a Jewish holiday. So I'd like to give you an opportunity to explain what happened and also discuss moving forward, what are your plans in dealing with potential conflict of holidays, especially in our increasing multicultural country?
So in this election, and as we said earlier, this was a fixed date election with a majority government, so we had many years to plan. And of course, when you do have those years to plan, you take advantage of that. In the summer leading up to the elections, so in the summer of 2018, we did consider the situation of the conflict with Jewish holidays. We had some conversations with members of the Jewish community. Our impressions there at that point was that having some accommodation for observant members of the Jewish community would be satisfactory. And based on that, and I'll come back to that in a moment, based on that, we began a number of planning exercises that were important for the population as a whole. We began having conversations with school boards to have PD days to allow access to schools which are accessible, to have workers or young workers who are typically good workers. We examined the polling divisions and used some technology to do some proximity analysis in terms of potential polling locations. So the entire planning of the election was based from that point on, from basically September of 2018, on a fixed date calendar for October 21st. Now, in the spring, I started receiving, in the spring of 2019, representations that there should be a move of the date, that it would be preferable, in fact, it would be necessary for some voters and in particular one potential candidate, to have a different voting day. At that point, I made what I considered a very difficult decision, which is to maintain my recommendations, basically not recommend to the Governor General a change of polling day, but to have a very ambitious action plan for accommodating Jewish electors, observant Jewish electors, in 54 ridings where there was 1% Jewish population. We engaged with the representatives of the Jewish community. We offered a range of services, and they determined for them, for their community, what was most suitable to them. And I can say, looking at the turnout, there was a small downward variation, but not a major, 2 or 3%, sometimes 4% variation in the top 10 ridings where there was important Jewish community. I think the way forward, we need to do a better job at engaging earlier. If we're going to have fixed date election, we need to clarify these issues well in advance. The law currently provides that I can make a recommendation to the Governor General until, I believe, sometimes in August 5th or something like that. That is much too late in the calendar. So we will need to revisit that, and we need to do a better job of consulting, but we need a process which provides certainty for everybody a year out of the election.
Thank you, Mr. Perot. The last question I have is also, I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk about the confusion that happened towards Election Day about NGOs advocating for causes or issues they care about, and whether that would have been considered an election interference or expense or not.
Yes, so we had, it was a bit of a unique circumstances. There was confusion as we got close to the issue of the writ. During the pre-writ period, there was confusion on the rules governing third parties, and this was what I would call second-hand confusion, in the sense that because of the new rules, especially for the pre-writ period, but also the new rules during the writ period on third-party expenses other than advertising, we did a fair amount of outreach and information to alert third parties, which can be anybody, it can be individuals, groups, about the new rules and the fact that they need to be sure to comply with the new requirements. Through those training and awareness sessions, some people became aware through second-hand confusion of the rules, and the confusion that arose concerned pre-existing rules that have been in place for 20 years that have not changed regarding issue advertising. And there was this impression that nobody could talk about the environment or a particular issue without running afoul of the legislation.
And we have Mr. Duncan.
Very much, and as per usual, I have about 10 questions, so I'll get through all of them today, I know, but my previous an experience I had before being a member was being a campaign manager 3 times at the federal level and at the provincial level, so some of my questions are a little more technical, and I know we're meeting, I think, later this month, and I have a full list to go over with you on some things, but I want to build a little bit on the social media influence and your comments about voter registration and getting people there. I agree with the initiative or the goal, I think the way of going about it. Obviously, you pulled back, wasn't the best way, but just from a technical perspective, what work do you do with post-secondary institutions in advance, and are there privacy rights issues that you have in terms of going to, for example, Carleton University, where I went? Do you go to the residents and say, look, the organization, Residents Association, say, give us a list 2 weeks before the writ drops, depending of the people who are currently in this building, or does privacy that they can't give you that information, is that an issue? To me, there's seniors' homes that goes on and on of where this is an opportunity. Can you outline what that is?
So privacy rules, typically provincial privacy rules, restrict the ability of institutions, be they seniors' homes, be they university, to give us information about their communities, their students or their residents in some cases. Now, we do have data, our own data from the voters list, of course, and we do targeted revision in seniors' homes. On campuses, it's a bit different. On campus, students sometimes live in residence, sometimes they live in the city. In the city, they may be in their home riding, or they may be in another riding. So it's a much more fluid.
Who's where to vote in that case. But just knowing the limited amount of time, you don't go to a university residence and say, can you give us our list, or you don't have that power to do that?
No, we don't.
Could that be something, a recommendation or a willingness you would like to have? Wouldn't that eliminate the problem of you having to go in door to door, of just saying, if we can get through the privacy issues of going and just saying, can you provide us a list in certain times? If the legislation says you have the right to do this for electoral purposes, would that not solve a lot of time and work and effort?
It may create others, because the provincial legislation would bind the authorities. Now, the federal one if it written properly, would override the provincial ones. But in practice, this may cause confusion and concern. But I'm not close to it, and we can look at that. Again, I think the issue of youth registration is an important one. We've made some good progress. We've gone from 72 to 78%, which is significant. We do have polling places in university residences, and that works well. The issue is more about the others who are not in residence. And
fair. And also, I will say I equate the exact same challenge of university residences to seniors' homes as well. Of that a little bit different, in terms of how by getting those lists, and I'll comment on that further. What's your relationship with provinces, and do you have any formal relationship whatsoever in any way with Elections Ontario, Elections Quebec, Elections British Columbia?
Absolutely. We have ongoing discussions with each of the electoral management bodies. We have we've created a secretariat to collaborate more closely.
You share any data, and not just voter statistics per se, but again, the national list of electors, does that go back and forth? Is there tight cohesion with that?
There is now. It varies from province to province. There are some slight variations, but for the most part, yes, we do receive and give data on the voters from the National Register of Electors.
Okay. Cybersecurity. You mentioned that there weren't many issues. Good for that. But part of the challenge is, and I'm wondering if it's going to be in your report. My understanding is the Ontario election in 2018 used more technology. They had computers at voting stations. They used voting tabulators. You had done a trial with that, and I believe you had pulled back on going further with that because of cybersecurity concerns. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? And can you confirm that experiment or that aspect will be included in your report of why it didn't work and what we might need to do to get there to try that going forward?
Well, it won't be in my report, but I'm happy to talk about it. It's not in my report because we never even made it to the pilot, which is why I didn't use it in the election. The solution, which was an electronic poll book, not for tabulation, but for processing the voters, was not ready to be used, partly for security reasons, but other reasons as well, in pilots, in by-elections, in the year leading up to the election. So that being the case, I was not prepared, not having tested it, to deploy it in the general election. Moving forward, and again, in a minority, there's a limit to what we can do, but we will need to pursue that avenue, do some by-elections, and see how we can leverage that to reduce the footprint of the workforce.
And again, I will, in our meeting, I'll maybe be advocating to include some sort of aspect on that, because I think it is an important point going forward for future elections of those challenges of how it didn't get there. I'll just note in Ontario, tens of thousands, I will say, of polling sites use this technology, I don't think without issue, yet at a federal level, it couldn't even get to a pilot. So my question is more, if you had concerns not getting to a pilot, how did Elections Ontario actually have thousands of these in use in the province in June 2018? So again, that may speak to some differences they have in what they consider cybersecurity, but I do think it might be something to pick up on.
We're over time at this point, though. Thank you, though. No, good questions. Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you. Mr. Perreault, I want to just say thank you for being here and for the work that you do. To echo my colleague Mr. O'Gabra's point, is we really appreciate the work that you do. So far in your answers, I've heard a real commitment to constant improvement, which I really appreciate. I have 3 questions. Let's see if we can get through all of them, but I'll definitely probably get to ask 2. So related to contingency planning, I know there were extreme weather events. In Ontario, we actually had the potential for a teachers' strike leading up to the election, which would have caused quite a bit of reshuffling and identifying additional sites for polling stations, etc. And for me, these were top of mind. I found the returning officer in Whitby in my riding to be incredibly responsive to the concerns that we had and very communicative in terms of identifying alternative sites potentially. Now with coronavirus, being a major topic of discussion right now and a cause for concern, and the possibility at any time of a snap election, I just wondered if you could go a little bit more in depth and tell us about any situational analysis or scenario building that you do and how you come up with mitigation strategies specific to the kinds of things that we might anticipate, like an outbreak of a virus, for example.
Yes, and a federal election is a very large undertaking, and you can't easily pivot on a dime. You referred to the strike. We had issued voter information cards all across Ontario when the strike emerged, and it came very close to having to reissue 3 million VIX in the Toronto area. And we were and I was personally calling all the schools and school boards to make sure we had it's very hard to pivot. There is provision in the legislation for canceling an election, which is the last thing we want to do. In Manitoba, we had to consider that. And the question is, can we offer voting services to Canadians in a particular electoral district? And we go out of our way, we adapt the rules, which I can do under the legislation, to adjust the service offering. We have basically right now 2 task forces. One is beginning to look at how we could better adjust to weather incidents. I think what we did in this election, for a range of reasons, not just weather incidents, we used special ballot kiosks for the Jewish communities, but also in Manitoba for the workers, the line workers, the emergency workers. And And we used special ballots to create kiosks where they could vote out of writing. We'll need to explore how we can better prepare for that. One of the challenges is the workforce. In Manitoba, we had to fly our headquarters staff into Manitoba because there's nobody left on the ground to work at those polls. So we're literally pulling people from the floors in Gatineau and putting them on flights to Manitoba. So there's a limit to what you can do. In terms of the virus, we are in contact with health authorities. I know next week, for example, in France, they're having municipal elections. They've decided to go forward. They will provide some hand sanitizer, and they're asking their voters to bring their own pencils or pens to vote. So we'll examine how that works. One of the questions I have, and I don't have the answer yet, is does it make sense for Elections Canada to procure a whole lot of hand sanitizer at a time where it could be better used in hospitals or other places in the country? Is it for me to stockpile on masks or hand sanitizer, or should it not be for the government? So we have to have those discussions and decide what is the best way forward.
Thank you for that answer. One other thing that you mentioned I saw in your report was that workers, there was a larger proportion of workers that were scheduled or recruited that did not show up, between 5 and 15%, I understand. Just wondering, I think you made a comment about maybe operating with less people in the future. I don't know if that's the overall strategy for how to move forward, or whether it's just increasing engagement and ensuring people show up. But could you tell us a little bit about what you plan to do to sort of address that gap, which is probably a major concern for you?
It is a major concern, and the answer would be both. So we need to look at our recruitment strategy. There was possibly, and again, we'll do the analysis for the next report, possibly a law of unintended consequence. For this election, returning officers were allowed to hire within neighboring districts. And we know, and anecdotally, and we'll get some data on this, that some people signed up to work in 2 different districts and then chose to go in one at the last minute because their friend was working in somewhere. So we need to have systems in place that flag these issues more centrally to avoid this. So these are the kinds of issues that we need to look
at. We'll go with Madame Normandy for 1 minute, please.
Just a general question. If a voter doesn't have an ID card and someone sponsors or guarantees them, we have more and more ID cards in our wallets as time goes by. So do you have any statistics on the trends of on the number of people who use that way to be identified? Well, in that area, I'm not sure that the report we're working on will be ready for the next election. This is a very laborious piece of work that we are doing. So we have exterior work being done by PricewaterhouseCoopers that will give us a little bit more information on the use of ID cards and the Elections Canada card included. So we'll have a bit more information on all of that, if you will. But
On va l'avoir, mais je ne peux pas le garantir pour le prochain rapport.
For the respondent, we'll have to wait until the next visit.
So in my writing, hiring people for Elections Canada was really a significant challenge. And I'm just wondering if in any of your reports you'll be looking at the difference between hiring in rural and remote communities as opposed to urban ones. Because one of the challenges was some of our communities are smaller and having multiple challenges, so there was less people to hire. So I'm just wondering if you'll be looking at that.
Well, we're going to break down the numbers as we're going to slice it and dice it and see by age group and look at all possible correlations. And remote communities may well be one of those. And perhaps Michelle, you have something to add to this, but we will be looking at this very closely because that was and will continue to be a major challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this ends our time that we had slotted. Thank you, Monsieur Perreault. And thank you, Monsieur Russell and St. Perry. It was lovely to have all of you before us. I know that we will meet again not too long from now, and there will be regular occurrences where you'll be able to advise us on the work that you're undertaking. Thank you so much. So we will move into camera for the next part of the meeting.
Yes, we just have to suspend while we go in camera.
Yes, and we'll suspend while we're going into camera.
Thank you.